When I was alive, Charles got tired of me, handed me divorce papers, and married the woman he loved while she was pregnant. I died in a car accident on his wedding day, and he went crazy after my death. Later, I came back to life. Charles promised me. I didn't be with her. I'll show you the call records. I'll give you my WeChat password. I'll show you the car's records. I'll let you monitor my daily whereabouts. He pleaded exhaustedly. Can't we start over? I refused. When I loved him, he got tired of me. Now that he sincerely offered his hands, I didn't want them. Chapter 1. Charles habitually tried to kiss me goodbye, but I smiled and dodged. Frowning, Charles turned coldly. How else are you going to make a scene? I've already apologized for Gloria. I smiled lightly. I'm not causing a scene, just have a cold, don't want to infect you. Charles stared at me. Lucy, if you're afraid I'll betray you, is this a good way to keep me? I raised my head and laughed. Okay, go to work. Gloria is waiting for you. Charles frowned and left, slamming the door. Still smiling, I turned and went to my younger Uncle Douglas's room, gently asking him. Hungry? Let's go downstairs and have breakfast. Douglas was by the window, turned his face hearing me, his dark, calm eyes softened slightly as he nodded gently. Okay. As I went downstairs with Douglas, Charles called me again. Lucy, it was my fault for drinking with Gloria and coming home late, but I was really just drunk, nothing happened. This is my third apology to you, stop being unreasonable and making a scene. Got it. I handed milk to Douglas, feeling no ripples in my heart, finding it even funny. I knew nothing happened between them now, but I also knew what would happen later. Because I am a person who has died once. This is my reincarnation. In my previous life, I watched Charles and Gloria getting closer. I cried, made scenes, tried to stop them, but I couldn't do anything, just let Charles get more and more tired, staying out late more often. Finally, he handed me divorce papers when Gloria got pregnant. I drove to find Charles on their wedding day, trying to make him change his mind, but got into a car accident, calling him from the emergency room with my last strength. He didn't answer, Gloria did, triumphantly saying, Please don't disturb my husband, keep your distance from married men. Desperate, I dropped the phone, lost all will to live, the doctors couldn't save me. Finally, as I closed my eyes, feeling pain and cold, lying alone in the hospital, my parents abroad, everyone else at Charles's wedding. The doctors went around informing everyone, only Douglas, the neglected illegitimate son of the Bennets, rushed to the hospital to see me off. I remember him softly saying in my ear, You can rest assured, I'll make the Bennets pay for you. I glanced at his face, that handsome face now filled with anger. I couldn't thank him, reluctantly closed my eyes. My last wish before leaving was, if there's a next life, never to love Charles again. Unexpectedly, the heavens heard my wish, and let me be reborn. When I opened my eyes again, it was last night. Charles and I had our first fight because of Gloria. Charles and Gloria went out for dinner after work, got drunk, and only returned home in the late night, reeking of perfume. I confronted him, crying uncontrollably, while Charles just rubbed his forehead impatiently, saying he was drunk and Gloria took care of him at her place for a few hours. That's when I came in. Reflecting on my past life, I was certain that at that moment, Charles and Gloria hadn't started a relationship yet. I still had a chance to save or perhaps prevent it. But I just closed my questioning mouth, wiped away my tears, quietly hugged the blanket and went to sleep in the guest room, ignoring Charles knocking on the door. I remembered the vow I made in my past life, if there's a next life, I will never love Charles again. Let him and Gloria develop however they want, I might even play along. This life was hard-earned, a bargain with my life. I no longer wanted to be in love, I wanted to live for myself and repay the one who finally let me go. Chapter 2. Douglas and I were having breakfast at a restaurant. He kept his head down, revealing a clean, slender neck, with crow-like eyelashes covering his deep eyes, making it hard to read his expression. Ever since he was brought back to the Bennett family, he had been silent and on the edge. The Bennett family looked down on his background, almost no one remembered him, except for me occasionally giving him gifts and bringing him medicine when he was sick. A small gesture, a farewell, was well worth it. He had a small company handed down by the Bennett family, on the verge of bankruptcy, considered his inheritance. I noticed his lack of sleep during those days, always waking up in the middle of the night to drink water downstairs. Looking at his pale face and dark circles, I thought. Seeing you in such a state, is your company not doing well? Do you need help? I can invest. My parents were abroad, and the domestic industries were under my management. In my past life, despite graduating from a prestigious university, I invested all my thoughts in Charles. He disliked me being in the spotlight, didn't like strong women, so I handed the company over to him, content to be submissive, driving him to work, hoping for his return. But in the end, he grew tired of me. He felt I was confined at home, narrow-minded, only thinking about love. Whereas Gloria was different, she moved in the same circles as him in the workplace, had a different perspective, which he appreciated. This life, I refuse to be trapped at home again. I want to go back to my company. Douglas glanced at me, then lowered his gaze, saying, I just had a nightmare. Sister, focus on yourself when you have time. We've been married for 3 years, and you've never visited your industry, right? Calling me sister was Douglas' little stubbornness. He called me sister before marriage, and even after, he never changed his address. Charles got upset a few times because of this, but he never managed to change. I wiped my mouth and replied. I will take back my industry. If you need investment, come find me. I am obliged to help. Douglas looked deeply at me, then continued eating, as if contemplating something. After a while, he spoke. Sister, can you rent me 2 floors of your office building? I'll pay market price. He explained. My company's rent is too high, I've been wanting to move to a new location. If I rented to him, he would be in the same building as my company, making it easier for me to repay him. So, I agreed without hesitation, made a quick call to the company secretary to arrange it. Not long after, Charles called. You're renting the office building to Douglas? I was trying on my professional attire in front of the dressing mirror and casually replied. Yes. Douglas is of what background, what business do you have with him? Charles was angry. You've been at home for too long, not understanding people. My dad has so many illegitimate children, but only he managed to squeeze into the Bennett family. His methods are beyond your imagination. He ordered me. Just stay at home, don't get involved in business matters. If you have nothing to do, go buy a bag, buy some clothes, beautify yourself. I smiled. But that's my industry. I added. From before we got married. Charles hesitated for a moment, then asked me calmly. Are you still mad at me? No. I told him earnestly. I won't be angry no matter what happens between you and Gloria. I just want to reclaim my industry. Do you suspect me of embezzling your money? Charles asked sternly. You won't. I shook my head. I don't have such thoughts. I just want to get back my industry, it's that simple. In my past life, he never embezzled my industry until death. Even during the divorce, he returned it to me. Aside from cheating and causing me to have a car accident, Charles hadn't made any other mistakes. But this one act was enough for me to never forgive him. Charles's voice turned cold. Do as you please, but my people will gradually withdraw. This was the first time I didn't listen to him, his punishment for me. I nodded with a smile. As you wish. Chapter 3. As expected, Charles followed through, moving away a third of his people within a few hours, leaving me with a mess. But I wasn't worried. After dying once, you realize nothing is scarier than death. Those people advised me during the handover. The company is stable in the hands of the Bennett CEO. You can just relax at home and wait for the CEO to bring back money to you. I made a gesture of please, saying, I wish you great success at the Bennett family. I remained unmoved, angering Charles. He called. Don't challenge areas you're not suited for. You're just a house bunny, you should be cute and carefree at home. I looked at the company's financial statements, jotting down notes in my notebook, and smiled. What about Gloria? How is she able to accompany you in the business world? He blurted out. She's a fox, born to hunt. I reminded him slowly. Gloria and I were college classmates, and back then, I had better grades than her. Even Gloria's job was recommended by me to Charles. And Charles probably didn't even know that the cute and carefree bunny he imagined had a streak of courage in her. Otherwise, where did the saying rabbits kick eagles come from? In my past life, my courage was used in death. This life I'll use it in life. That night, Charles returned home at 1 in the morning. He smelled of Gloria's usual perfume and a hint of alcohol. I glanced at the financial report under the light and casually said, "Take a shower before going to bed." Charles furrowed his brows coldly. "Why aren't you causing a scene today?" I stretched lazily. "I don't have the energy. Besides, it's normal for you to have business entertainment." Charles stared at me, as if not used to this side of me. He seems to still be waiting for me to cry and beg for an explanation. But I walked into the bathroom, removed the mask from my face, and calmly started my skincare routine. He followed me, standing at the doorway, looking at me in the mirror, and started explaining first. I was having dinner with a client, Gloria got drunk, and I took her home. I gave him a thumbs up. Great. My husband is the best boss. I wish you and your secretary, Chensa, harmony and success together. Success, to speed up Gloria's pregnancy. By then I would have probably sorted out the company affairs, hired new people, and could present Charles with the remaining 2/3 of the management team and the divorce agreement as a gift. But Charles frowned. Harmony and success shouldn't be used like that. He reached out to me. "Lucy, stop being stubborn, be a good girl, okay?" I burst into laughter. Charles underestimated himself. He loved the little fox, yet always wanted me to be a good girl. I bypassed him, picked up the quilt. "You go to bed first, I'm still sick, I'll sleep in the guest room." Charles's face darkened. He grabbed my arm, gritting his teeth. "Do you think I will never change, so you can be so bold?" I raised an eyebrow at him. "Yes." I pulled his hand away and went to the guest room. I was bold, but my boldness was based on my heart that no longer loved. With a dead heart, I was fearless all the way. I heard Charles's heavy footsteps, going downstairs, closing the door, starting the car, all in one go. After a while, I saw Gloria's social media post, no picture, just 2 words, heartache. I commented with a smile. "Speedy heartache relief, check it out." She replied with an awkward smile. I closed WeChat, lit a cigarette, and watched the ember glow in the darkness. In a place in my heart, a crack slowly opened up. The wounds of the past were slowly seeping out. In this life, I accelerated Charles's path to infidelity. I had hoped, perhaps in this life, things would be different. But nothing was different, he was still running towards Gloria right under my nose. Chapter 4. The next morning, Douglas and I appeared at the company together. The entire office building belonged to me, and conveniently, there were 2 empty floors which I rented out to him. Charles didn't return all night, only calling me at noon, gritting his teeth on the phone. "What's the relationship between you and Douglas? Starting to act out because of him?" "Empty floors just mean losses, Douglas offered market price so I rented to him, what's wrong?" I calmly replied. "Why are you so concerned about this? Isn't he your brother? I told you, he's deep and cunning, stay away from him." Charles said coldly. "If he suddenly moves downstairs to your place, he definitely has an agenda. Don't come crying to me later to clean up the mess." I politely smiled. "Noted, thank you for the reminder, anything else?" "Lucy, when will you stop being unreasonable?" Charles was barely containing his anger. "My patience is limited." I looked up at Douglas, who was eavesdropping on the side, gestured for him to mind his own business, and smiled slyly at Charles. Honey, true unreasonable behavior is like this. Where were you last night? Show me the car's GPS records? Phone call logs? Tell me your WeChat password? Charles fell silent. After a while, he sighed, reluctantly asked me to behave, and hung up the phone. I sighed too. In the previous life, I was driven to the brink by his subtle hints, almost driven to madness, just as I did to him. I still remember the look of disgust in his eyes back then. He said Gloria would never investigate him like this. He said that even if something happened between him and Gloria, it was because of me. Now I don't investigate him at all, but he doesn't seem too pleased either. Douglas sat across from me, took a sip of tea, and said, "You're not happy." I forced a smile. Arguments are never happy. Douglas lowered his gaze, hiding his expression. He said I have ulterior motives towards you. I shrugged it off, casually asking with a smile. Do you? Suddenly, Douglas looked up, his dark eyes reflecting my figure. I do. Unfazed, I smiled. What are you after? Tell me, I'll gladly oblige. I remember both grievances and kindness. The gratitude from the previous life must be repaid in this one. Douglas just lowered his head to drink his tea, no longer speaking, just a slight curve forming at the corner of his mouth. In the following days, I was so busy that I barely had time to breathe, getting home around 10 every night. But Charles returned even later than me. I didn't bother with him. Once home, I would wash up and head to the guest room to sleep with the door locked. Sometimes I sighed. If I hadn't handed the company over to Charles in the previous life, perhaps I wouldn't have reached that point. Being so busy at high intensity, there was no energy left for romantic sorrows. Douglas swiftly moved his company downstairs to mine. Sometimes we would go to work or leave work together. I hadn't been in the business world for a long time, still slowly adapting. Occasionally, Douglas would invite me to lunch, offering guidance over a meal. At first, I didn't take it seriously. After all, he was younger and not much more experienced than me. But gradually, I was left speechless. He could be half of my teacher. Many difficult problems were resolved with his help. He was no less than Charles. I was puzzled. How do you know so much? Douglas smiled and sipped his tea, then looked out the window leisurely. When my father taught Charles, I eavesdropped outside the door. He asked me casually, "Do you think Charles was right, that I'm very scheming?" I lowered my head to eat. None of my business, anyway, you wouldn't harm me. Douglas paused. Are you that sure? I nodded. The one who drove me to despair was my husband. While he was the one who swore to avenge me while I waited for death alone. I believe in my intuition. Douglas seemed very happy, smiled at me, and winked. I had never seen him smile before, never knew that his smile could be so bright and dazzling. He started coming upstairs to find me whenever he had free time, teaching me how to handle company documents. He also began answering calls and dealing with business matters in front of me, no longer avoiding me. That's when I realized the failing company that the Bennett family had thrown at him had long been revitalized by him. And had even become a new force in the capital market that couldn't be ignored. The simple office environment was just a facade. I began to understand what Charles meant by saying he had a deep mind. But I didn't care. My intuition always told me that Douglas looked at me strangely, but he would never harm me. Charles and I were still sleeping in separate rooms, and Charles still came home late, carrying a faint scent of perfume. Sometimes he would hide to take phone calls, but later, seeing that I remained unmoved, he simply answered the phone in front of me, and without exception, it was always Gloria calling. Some calls were about work, some were about his health, and from time to time, she would even greet me. I could hear it all, but I felt no ripples in my heart, just noise. Later, when Charles answered the phone, I would grab my computer and leave, smiling kindly and politely at him. You go ahead and take the call, I won't disturb you. I would close the door and go to the guest room, hearing a loud noise from the bedroom, not knowing what Charles had knocked over. I couldn't be bothered, so I just went to sleep. That night, Charles sat in the dining room drinking alone, drank a lot, got drunk, and came to knock on my door. When I didn't open it, he kept knocking persistently. I said helplessly, "I'm sleeping, I have things to do tomorrow." In a hoarse voice, Charles said, "I have had no relationship with Gloria, I'm just mad at you." I swear. He was irritated. "It's all because you don't care about me. You don't even bother to argue, why?" I laughed. "Because I trust you. Let me sleep, okay?" Charles seemed very pained. "I'm your husband, I should be sleeping with you. I have a cold. You've been sick for 2 months." Charles suddenly exploded. "I'll show you call logs. I'll give you my WeChat password. I'll show you the car's GPS records. I'll show you the surveillance along my daily route, I'll even copy Gloria's surveillance for you." Exhausted, he said, "Let me in, okay?" I didn't open the door. When I wanted him, he found me annoying. Now that he offered himself, I didn't want it. Charles leaned against my door and slept there all night. The next morning, with bloodshot eyes, he looked at me seriously, not missing any expression on my face. "Do you not love me anymore?" I smiled and touched his face. "Don't overthink it, I just have a cold." If it were in the previous life, I might have been moved, I might have hugged him and cried bitterly. But in this life, I watched him leave quietly after slamming the door. Having died once, people can become heartless. Chapter 5. Charles didn't come home for several days. Gloria called me and advised earnestly. "What's going on between you and Charles? He has been particularly low these days, always calling me to drink in the middle of the night. Technically, you should call him CEO Bennett." I stared at the document approvals on my computer and at the same time asked her several questions about business matters. Gloria was competent, so why not make use of her abilities? Dizzy from my questions, Gloria, once she regained her composure, couldn't believe it. "Are you more concerned about your company than about Charles not coming home?" she hinted. "He always wants to drink with me, always complaining that you're unreasonable. Aren't you afraid of being replaced if this continues?" "Such as by you?" I asked absent-mindedly, staring at the computer screen. Gloria paused, then said nothing and hung up. I sat in front of the computer for a while. In this life, I still couldn't face Gloria's instigations. The crack in my heart began to ache again. It turned out that even in a new life, people could remember the pain from their previous life clearly. When I was most hurt, Charles called. "Gloria said you misunderstood her just now and scolded her?" I nodded in agreement, waiting for Charles to explode. In the past life, when I was instigated by Gloria and scolded her, Charles had exploded, calling me ignorant and vulgar. But now, Charles spoke with a smile. "Lucy, you still care about me, don't you?" He smiled pleasantly. "Not arguing is admitting." I nodded. "Okay." During this time, the company was running smoothly. Through my parents, I found some reliable people, and Douglas even lent me a few highly capable executives. With the company sorted out, some things needed to be clarified. As it was time to leave work, I packed up and prepared to go to the restaurant Charles had booked. Suddenly, Douglas came upstairs and saw me applying lipstick. He said, "Charles is downstairs, holding a bunch of roses, and even changed the car to a sports car." "I know," I replied, closing the lipstick. "I'm having dinner with him tonight." Douglas lowered his head, hiding his expression. "Have you made up?" "No, just need to discuss something." Douglas shook his head. With his hands in his pockets, his eyes deep and mysterious, he asked, "Sister, do you still have feelings for Charles? Why, are you offering relationship advice?" I chuckled. Douglas also laughed, with a hint of meaning. If, one day I become enemies with Charles, would you hold a grudge against me?" I had some guesses. In the capital market, Douglas couldn't avoid the Bennett family. And when he mentioned the Bennett family, he had become increasingly indifferent, without any attachment, openly cold. The wolf will eventually hunt. Raising my index finger to my lips, I said. Don't tell anyone about this. I will pretend I didn't hear. In the moment I turned around, Douglas's almost inaudible voice reached my ear. You'll never guess why I'm going after him. My hearing was sharp, and I heard it. I turned back in confusion. Why? Douglas smiled at me. I said it's because I had a nightmare. Do you believe me? It was a ridiculous excuse, but I still nodded. I do. Because in his eyes, besides my shadow, there was a sense of bewilderment and unease. It must have been a terrifying dream. Downstairs, Charles was holding a huge bunch of roses, leaning against the sports car, attracting the attention of passers-by. They all looked at me with envy. But I felt it was unnecessary. When he first pursued me, he was sincere and passionate, pouring his heart out. Everyone said I would be very happy, and I thought so too. But then he cheated. I died. The past emotions turned to smoke and dissipated. I took the flowers, tossed them into the car, and said, "No need to waste, it's just business." He put his arm around my shoulder, I dodged, and got into the car. I saw a hint of disappointment on Charles's face, but I pretended not to notice. In the restaurant, Charles ordered a table full of dishes I loved. I fell silent. In the previous life, I wanted to win him back and invited him to dinner here, in the same spot. At that time, unconsciously, he ordered a table full of dishes Gloria loved. My heart ached, and we argued. He didn't admit it. He forgot that Gloria and I were college classmates, and over the 4 years, I knew what she liked to eat better than Charles did. After that unpleasant parting, Gloria became pregnant. Now, sitting in a familiar place, looking at a table full of food that catered to my appetite, I couldn't eat. There was a faint pain in my heart. I knew it was the naive girl from the past life weeping in my heart. Charles sighed. It seems like it's been a long time since we went out together. I nodded. Since you met Gloria. A hint of embarrassment crossed Charles's face. I really don't have much to do with her. It started with admiration, but later it was all to make you care. His hand reached out and covered mine. The palm was warm, just like before. Unfortunately, I was no longer the same. I pulled my hand away, sighed, and said, "How nice it would have been if you had said that in the previous life." What? Charles asked me in confusion. I sat up straight. Never mind, today I wanted to talk to you about something. I have something to say too. Charles said. Lucy, I want to pursue you again. I cut him off. But I want a divorce. Charles paused, seeming not to understand. He even laughed and asked me, "What did you say?" Leaning forward, I said, "I want a divorce." Charles, I want to divorce you. Chapter 6. Charles leaned back, seeming to be avoiding something. I leaned forward again. Charles, we don't need to continue this. I've prepared the divorce agreement. If you need the people you placed in my company back, I can return them. Charles furrowed his brow, took out a cigarette, deeply inhaled before remembering the restaurant was non-smoking, and then extinguished it. Taking a deep breath, he slightly furrowed his brow. Why? Because of Gloria. I hesitated for a moment. It made sense to say so. After all, in the previous life, it was Gloria's pregnancy that led to my divorce and the accident. Seeing me hesitate, Charles slammed the table heavily, growling lowly. I really didn't touch her. I just wanted to see you get worked up. I was genuinely confused. But didn't you dislike it when I got hysterical? Was he suffering from split personality in the past life? Or was he different this time around? I don't like your hysteria, but can't you feel anything at all? Charles seemed hurt. I listened in a daze, thought for a moment, and suddenly realized something. No, it's not because of Gloria. From beginning to end, it's all because of you, Charles, only because of you. I took out the divorce agreement from my bag, identical to the one he had given me in the previous life, and handed it to Charles. Take a look, I've considered both parties' interests, and we can discuss if you have objections. This was also the words he had given me in the previous life. Charles took the divorce agreement, glanced at it roughly, then smirked. Looks like you've been planning this for a long time, very thorough. I closed my eyes. If this divorce agreement was something that required long planning, then it was also him in the previous life who had planned for a long time. He looked at me, a mocking smile on his lips. I don't know why you want a divorce, Lucy. But it's not possible. He calmly tore the agreement to shreds, scattering them on the table, and smiled at me. Not possible, Lucy. We promised each other before we got married, never to mention divorce, have you forgotten? It's you who forgot first. I also turned cold, stood up. Tearing the agreement won't change anything. Charles, it's useless. Charles stood up. Let's go home. He didn't mention the agreement at all, as if it never happened, talking about topics that interested me along the way. Luxury goods, clothes, handbags, jewelry, fashion shows. But now, I was only interested in my company, and what he talked about, I didn't quite understand. We chatted aimlessly until we got home. Charles watched me go into the guest room to sleep, didn't say anything, just sighed imperceptibly. Hope your cold gets better soon. From that day on, Charles began to change. He came home promptly at 8 every day, always with a gift in hand. Sometimes a limited edition bag, sometimes high-end jewelry, sometimes flowers flown in from Europe. If I worked late, he would quietly wait at home for me, handing me the gift the moment I returned. If I refused, he would insist. He bitterly smiled. I didn't know waiting for someone to come home could be so painful. I'll attend useless social events less in the future. I lowered my head. There was a time when I couldn't sleep all night, struggling emotionally and mentally. Charles asked. When was that? I smiled at him. That's a story from a past life. Charles thought I was joking and handed me the gift, his eyes filled with a humble plea. Lucy, when will your cold get better? I placed the gift on the sofa and looked at him sincerely. It won't get better in this lifetime. Charles's eyes dimmed, but he forced a smile. I don't believe that. I'll wait for you. Without saying anything, I entered the guest room. A few days later, Charles told me about an important cocktail party we needed to attend together and asked for my cooperation. I wanted him to take Gloria, but Charles sternly said that everyone was bringing their wives and questioned why he should bring a secretary. Now managing my company, I understood the importance of networking. I also wanted to attend the party to expand my connections, so I agreed. That evening at the party, I went with Charles. Charles looked at me with fascination. You're truly beautiful. I smiled without responding. In the past, I had invested all my time in beauty treatments, makeup, and dressing up, but Charles never appreciated it. Tonight, I just wore a gown and light makeup, not as elaborate as in my past life, yet he was captivated. People are truly strange and perplexing creatures. Douglas was also at the banquet, raising his glass to me with eyes that seemed unfathomable, hiding his emotions. But he didn't bring a female companion. I suspected Charles had lied to me about the rule of needing a partner, especially since even Gloria had come alone. Seeing Charles arm in arm with me, Gloria's eyes dimmed for a moment, then she smiled and came over to greet us. CEO Bennett, your wife looks stunning tonight. She bit her lip, looking pitiful yet with a touch of subtle restraint. Charles glanced at her, then quickly averted his gaze and nodded. Yes, she is beautiful. Gloria forced a smile. CEO Bennett and his wife have reconciled. Congratulations. She looked at me. CEO Bennett got drunk before and came to my house, chatting about you until late at night. We haven't reconciled. I interrupted her. Gloria was stunned, a fleeting glint of light in her eyes. I repeated with a smile. We haven't reconciled. I'm here purely for business, so you can rest assured. I thought Gloria would be overjoyed, but she seemed regretful and angry. Madam, are you being too cruel to CEO Bennett? I can't bear to see it. CEO Bennett loves you so much, and you're treating his love like trash. Have you considered CEO Bennett's dignity as a man? Her righteous words amused me. I shrugged. You can consider it yourself. Why do you need me for that? You don't know how to cherish him. Gloria was angry. So many people adore CEO Bennett, but you don't care about him. You're in good fortune but fail to appreciate it. I turned to Charles. Does your secretary have the right to speak to me like this? Gloria also looked at him, her eyes filled with pity and affection. If I were a man, I wouldn't pass this test. Gloria should consider acting. Charles's face turned cold as he scolded her. Why are you meddling in my personal affairs? Know your place and don't get involved in things you shouldn't. Both Gloria and I were stunned. Charles looked at me again. If you don't like her, I can make her leave the company, even leave the city, and you'll never have to see her again. His eyes towards me were full of longing. Towards Gloria, they were full of impatience. I should have been happy, as this symbolized my complete victory over my rival after being reborn, right? But I couldn't find any joy in it, only feeling indifferent. It was just like in my past life, except this time, Gloria and I had swapped roles. Whether it was me or Gloria who had become tiresome to him, it made no difference. I couldn't find happiness. The more I tried, the more I remembered the bitterness of being rejected in my past life. Gloria ran off in tears, and Charles grabbed my arm. Lucy, like this, will your cold ever get better? I lowered my eyes. How could it get better? It never could in this lifetime. Some things are irreparable, like a life. I shook my head. It won't get better, never will, Charles. Stop dreaming, let's get a divorce. Charles hesitated, his face darkening slightly. He pulled me to a corner. Lucy, even if I treat Gloria this way, don't you trust me? What do you want me to do? I pushed Charles away, the pain of past wounds accumulating to this moment, the pain beginning to erupt. I don't want you to do anything, just get a divorce. Whatever you do with Gloria has nothing to do with me, I just want to leave you, understand? Charles pulled me back, gritting his teeth as he said, word by word. You're dreaming. He suddenly leaned down, kissing my lips, unclearly declaring. Lucy, don't even think about divorcing me in this lifetime. Chapter 7. I felt nauseous. These lips had kissed Gloria before. Even in my past life, I couldn't forgive that. I was that petty. Without hesitation, I raised my hand and slapped Charles hard across the face. The sound was crisp and loud, leaving his face swollen. I wiped my lips forcefully, almost wanting to scrape off a layer of skin. Stay the hell away from me. Charles's face went from pale to red, then to purple. Eventually, he looked at me with cold and indifferent eyes. He sneered. Well done, Lucy. Nobody has ever hit me before. He took a step back, his eyes fixed on me. You don't want me, right? I'll show you that if I want, there will be plenty of people climbing into my bed. With that, he turned and walked confidently towards Gloria in the distance, pulling her into his arms and leaving the banquet hall. I crouched down, tears inexplicably falling. I didn't know why I was crying, but the tears came without warning. I guess the foolish girl from my past life was the one crying. People had started to notice me, as I was the only one crouching at the party. Whispers spread, some came to ask if I was okay, but I ignored them all, just wanting to cry my heart out. Douglas pushed through the crowd and approached me, extending his hand. Sister, let me take you home. I raised my tearful eyes and saw his handsome face, filled with hostility, just like in my past life. Memories of past and present intertwined, I cried uncontrollably, grabbed his hand, and he pulled me into his arms. His voice was cold, suppressing anger. Don't worry, even if I have to overturn the Bennett family, I will help you seek revenge. I shuddered. Was it a coincidence? Why were his words the same as in the past life? I wanted to ask him, but cried too much to speak, so I let him lead me home, gently wiping away my makeup and tears with a wet towel, holding me close and soothing me like a child. Sister, don't cry. I'll help you vent, help you seek revenge. Don't cry, be good. I was exhausted, the memories of 2 lifetimes too heavy. I nestled in his arms, crying myself to sleep. In a daze, I felt him pick me up, carry me back to the guest room, tuck me in, and lock the door. I didn't sleep well, and in the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by a knocking at the door. Charles was there, drunk like a madman, shouting at the door. Open up. Lucy, open the door. I'm your husband, I want to come in. He yelled. I can't bring myself to hurt Gloria. You're all I think about. It's all because of you not wanting me. Open the door, Lucy, I won't allow you to reject me. Tears fell from my eyes once again. Memories of lying alone in the hospital waiting to die flooded back, overwhelming me. I suddenly flung the door open and slapped Charles across the face. Charles was stunned. Before he could react, I slapped him again. Tears streaming down my face, I said. Charles, I risked my life for you. A life. Can you bring that back? I sobbed. While I lay dying in the cold hospital, you were marrying Gloria. I called you just hoping you'd change your mind, but you wouldn't even answer the phone. You cut off my lifeline. I didn't die in a car accident, I died at your hands. Charles stood there, speechless, not knowing what to say. I crouched down, covering my face. Once certain things are done, the outcome is sealed, no one can change it. Charles tried to reach out to me. Lucy, I understand now, you're having a mental breakdown, right? Are you so afraid of Gloria and me that you're having hallucinations? Tomorrow, I'll arrange for a doctor, we'll go see one, and everything will be fine. He couldn't finish his sentence before collapsing in front of me. Douglas stood behind him, clapped his hands, expressionless. Too much talk, I'll let him rest for a bit. I nervously reached out to feel Charles's breath, relieved that he was still alive. Douglas kicked Charles to the side and slowly crouched beside me. I noticed he was trembling violently, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he held me tightly. He even refused to let me go back to bed, sitting on the floor, embracing me tightly, silent as if surviving a disaster, still trembling. I tried to make him let go several times, but he seemed not to hear, just holding on to me. Until early morning, I couldn't stay awake and fell asleep. Before sleeping, I heard his hoarse voice. That dream, it's real. I slept in Douglas's arms for 2 hours, but couldn't sleep anymore. When I woke up, it seemed like the pent-up frustration in my heart had dissipated, and I no longer felt the tears of the foolish girl from my past life. Perhaps she had finally found peace and decided to disappear from this world. After she disappeared, I knew it was time for me to leave as well. Glancing at Douglas, who was still awake with bloodshot eyes, I weakly smiled at him. Can you help me move? Douglas nodded, stood up, and we crossed over the still unconscious Charles in the hallway to pack our things. In less than half an hour, I moved back to the empty house of my parents. Before leaving, I took a last look at the Bennett family residence, devoid of any trace of my existence, let out a bitter smile, turned my back to the rising sun, and walked out. Every day thereafter felt brand new. Chapter 8. After I moved out, Charles immediately fired Gloria, then came to me to beg, plead, and persuade. But he didn't dare to go too far. He always felt I had a mental illness, afraid that provoking me would trigger an episode. Apart from divorce, he complied with everything else, leaving as soon as I got upset. Eventually, he didn't have much time left to focus on emotions. Douglas began his revenge on the Bennett family, planning meticulously, using both overt and covert tactics, leaving Charles in a mess. No one expected that a neglected child of the Bennett family would one day grow into a wolf, turning back to devour his own family without reason. The retaliation lasted a year, with Douglas rising as a new elite in the business world, and the Bennett family left severely weakened, never to recover their former glory. It was me who made Douglas stop. Not out of sympathy for Charles, but because Douglas made me worry. Since that night he held me in his arms, the hostility in his eyes never dissipated, only growing stronger. Sometimes he would fall into silence without warning, then hug me tightly, forcing me to swear to live well. I felt it wasn't me with the mental issue, but him. I urged him to stop overthinking and take a break. Douglas refused, which made me angry. He was particularly afraid of making me angry, always thinking that my anger would lead to irreparable foolish actions. I found it amusing, not knowing where he got that idea. In the end, Douglas agreed to stop and rest, finally allowing Charles to breathe a sigh of relief and come to find me. He was no longer the same as before, his once handsome face now unshaven, looking haggard. He used to never drink during the day, but now, in the middle of the afternoon, there was a faint smell of alcohol around him. He sighed. "Since you left, I've been in pain every day. I've been suffering from insomnia for a long time now." Sitting on a chair, his eyes a shade of blue, as if he hadn't slept in a long time, he pleaded with me. "Lucy, let me sleep here for a while, okay? I realized after you left that I can only sleep well where you are." I sighed but didn't say a word. Charles quickly fell asleep. But he didn't sleep soundly, seeming to be dreaming, his eyeballs moving rapidly under his eyelids, his eyebrows furrowed deeply. After a while, he began to feel restless and started talking in his sleep. "No, stop, Lucy, stop." He even shouted. "Lucy. Hang in there. Cooperate with the doctor. Wait for me to save you." He shouted for who knows how long, then choked up. A man who never shed tears began to cry in small, fragmented sobs. From those fragmented cries, it escalated into heart-wrenching wails. I seemed to be infected by his emotions, scenes from my past life flashed uncontrollably in my mind, from getting to know each other, falling in love, to betrayal, and death. Tears streamed down my face one by one, choking me up. That foolish girl, is she okay, now? Has she entered eternal sleep? It seemed like a long, long time went by. Charles woke up from his dream, his eyes bloodshot, tears still on his face. He jumped up suddenly, frantically rushing over to me, looking closely, trembling as he reached out his hand to touch my face. "Lucy, you're alive, that's great." His eyes were red. "I had a dream, in the dream, I did something stupid that made you leave." His voice hoarse, tears rolling down his face. That dream was too terrifying. Charles suddenly stopped. He looked at me in disbelief, trembling and hesitantly asked. "I remember, before you moved out, you said you had lost a life for me, Lucy, right?" He grabbed my hand. "Lucy, did you say it that time, or did I remember wrong when drunk? You said you were reborn once, right?" I had known Charles for so many years across 2 lifetimes, and I had never seen him so cautious, each word spoken as if on thin ice. I even wondered, if it were the foolish girl from my past life now, would she forgive this haggard man standing before her? Unfortunately, I am not her. I smiled at him with red eyes. "What do you think?" Charles shook his head, wanting to laugh but unable to. "I think it's not logical." I wiped away my tears, neither nodding nor shaking my head. "I can't say. What's done is done. What's hurt is hurt. What's lost is lost." I couldn't deny it, nor would I. Charles suddenly stood up, staggering backward, continuously shaking his head. "It's not real, it's not logical, it's just a dream." He forced a smile. "Lucy, did your mental illness infect me?" I gently told him. "Mental illness is not contagious." I took out the divorce agreement. "Charles, I've already lost a life for you once, isn't that enough for you to let me go? Divorce is our only way out." Charles frantically denied. "No, it's not possible, you've infected me with mental illness, I don't believe it." He stumbled away, as if there were ghosts chasing him. Chapter 9. 3 days, Charles disappeared for a full 3 days. The entire Bennett family searched for him but couldn't find him. After 3 days, Charles appeared in my office, his clothes wrinkled, looking utterly disheveled. His voice hoarse. "I dreamt for 3 days. Both past and present lives. his eyes brimming with tears. I believe you, Lucy. Charles reached out his hand to me. Give me the divorce agreement, I'll sign it. Lucy, I have no face to win you back. I handed him the divorce agreement and without even looking, he signed his name. As he left, tears rolled down his face. I, Charles, will never marry again, will never touch another woman. Lucy, this is my atonement to you. Watching his haggard figure walk away, my heart felt a pang, but also a sense of relief. The marriage of 2 lifetimes finally came to an end. I closed my eyes wearily, but somehow fell into a dream, perhaps due to exhaustion. I got caught in a dream just like Charles, scenes from my past life flashing before my eyes. It kept flashing until I was waiting to die in the hospital, and Douglas rushed to accompany me on my final journey. I thought my dream was about to end, after all, my life was over. But no, the dream continued. I saw Douglas holding my cold body, tears falling, the resentment in his eyes growing thick. His icy fingertips wiped the blood from my face, softly whispering in my ear. Sister, wait for me to come back for revenge, I'll tell you a secret. Tears fell on my face, cool. Later, Douglas went on a vengeful rampage against the Bennett family, bringing a once prominent family to ruin, leading to countless suicides and imprisonments. But the head of the Bennett family, Charles, remained indifferent. Even as the Bennett family crumbled, even as Gloria suffered a miscarriage due to the stress. Everyone said Charles had gone mad. He searched everywhere for mediums, seeking help from all over the world to reach my spirit. When the Bennett family fell and he ran out of money, he had to work to earn money to find me. He searched for 5 years, and in the 5th year, someone told him I had returned to the past. He began to pursue the methods from the past. Another 5 years passed, he had aged prematurely, with a head full of white hair. Douglas appeared before him, coldly stating, "Even if you find her, would she be willing to see you? You killed her, would you forgive the one who took her life?" Charles was stunned. He sat dumbfounded all night, and the next day, gave up looking for me. He turned into an alcoholic, drinking day and night, plagued by illness. He was taken to the hospital but refused treatment, giving up on life. As for Douglas, he buried me in a field of flowers, and no matter how busy he was, he would visit me in the flower field every day. He would drink, and when drunk, he would look at my gravestone and weep. Sister, do you know why I spared Charles's life? Because I also wanted to find you. I tried everything but failed, so I had to rely on Charles. At least Charles, like me, hasn't forgotten you. With one more person in the world thinking of you, maybe you'll come back. He would mutter to himself in front of my gravestone. Sister, when everyone looked down on me, you were the only one who smiled at me, cared if I had a fever, if I was hungry, who secretly gave me gifts, fed me medicine. He said, "Sister, I told you I had a secret to share. The secret is, from the first time you smiled at me, I fell in love with you. No one smiles as beautifully as you." He spent his life by my gravestone, never marrying. Chapter 10. When I woke up from the dream, I was exhausted, tears streaming down my face. I rushed downstairs to find Douglas, but he was not there. I called him. "Where are you?" Douglas hesitated. "I'm in a garden." Although I hadn't heard of Douglas visiting any garden, I had a sudden realization and thought of the flower sea in my dream. I drove straight to the garden and indeed, amidst a sea of peach and goose yellow, I saw his slender, tall figure. His eyes were hazy, as if just waking up from a dream. When he saw me approaching, he didn't have time to be surprised and reached out to me. "Sister, I just dreamed of you again." Still somewhat frightened, he hadn't fully awakened. "In my dream, I stayed by your side for a lifetime. I don't want to have this dream again." I placed my hand in his palm, letting him hold it, tears uncontrollably streaming down my face. "Did you plant this flower sea?" His ears turned slightly red as he nodded. "Why did you plant it?" "To show to the person I like." "The person you like, did she see it?" Douglas gazed deeply at me, gently pulling me into his arms. "She saw it. She's right beside me." His eyes carried a determined look, yet also a hint of apprehension. But I don't know if she likes me. She does. I nodded firmly. She likes you. Looking at his handsome face, his eyes filled with unbelievably joy. Even when he held me in his arms, he was careful not to hurt me. It's this careful man who was tainted by my grudge, who overturned his own family for my revenge. For 2 lifetimes. How could I not like him? Douglas, I divorced Charles. I leaned against his chest and whispered softly. I heard his heartbeat quicken, his arms tightening around me, enveloping me in his embrace. Sister, can I? You can. I nodded firmly. The next moment, he lowered his head and kissed my lips. Amidst the fragrance of flowers, in the sea of colors, we embraced each other passionately. In this lifetime, we finally moved on completely from the past.